Chair that doesn't have one. We have more chairs that take 25 days. Well, tonight we welcome you to Nature Talks, sponsored by Friends of Haystack Rock. We have 2 more talks coming up the second Wednesday of the month in March and in April. Tonight we are really pleased to be able to present North Coast Land Conservancy's Katie Bolke and Andrew Whitlock, who will be presenting Living Amongst the Green Giants. You will join an evening of celebrating life amongst these lands and waters, from the coastal prairies and wetlands to the peaks of the Coast Range, and from the dynamic intertribal to the expansive Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. You'll learn about the incredible impacts of local conservation with a presentation by NCLC's Marine Coordinator Andrew Whitlock and NCLC's Executive Director, Katie Bolke. In 2005, Katie started as North Coast Land Conservancy's first stewardship director, working under founding executive director Neil Mayo. After 3 years of learning the ropes alongside Neil, she took the helm in 2008 as executive director. Although her job at NCLC keeps her inside more than she would like, she manages to get her fix in the outdoors by following in her parents' footsteps, bug collecting with her 3 sons, and spending the summers hiking and camping with family. In March of 2023, Andrew Whitlock started as NCLC's Marine Program Coordinator, giving her an opportunity to further her passion for coastal conservation. In her leisure time, she enjoys nature journaling, walking outdoors at the Dawes Frigate, bird watching, and exploring tide birds. And I'm told he's still holding out hope to find evidence of the existence of millions.
Right, well, good evening, everybody. We're going to get a couple things figured out here so we can share a slideshow. It's very good to see you all. I haven't been with you in a very long time. So nice to be back in Cannon Beach. We also haven't given a live in-person presentation in a really long time, I think. Have you all gone to in-person presentations a good amount now in the last year or so? That's excellent. Well, it's great to be here. Got a lot of familiar faces. So, I'm Katie Bolke. I'm the executive director with North Coast Land Conservancy, and Angela and I are going to tag team a little bit. So I'm going to do the start of this presentation and then we'll switch. And Angela will take us into the ocean. In a moment. Happy Valentine's Day. It's nice to be your Valentine tonight. It's pretty unpleasant weather out, so I'm also very impressed that you all decided to go outside. So thank you for that. Okay, North Coast Land Conservancy. Here we go. We were whimsical in the name of this, saying living amongst the green giants, from big trees to sea anemones. We figure, after a number of years, it's like learn about your local land trust. That just gets a little bit old, especially because most of you in this room have probably heard me talk about the Land Conservancy many, many times now. So it still is, we're here tonight to talk about North Coast Land Conservancy and also just really celebrate what conservation does, which is protect the Oregon coast. And we love the Oregon coast. And we're going to share our love on Valentine's Day for the Oregon. I'll start with just a little bit of background of who NCLC is and some of the evolution that we're going through right now, particularly with the Marine program, which is real exciting. But our mission is helping to conserve Oregon's coastal lands and waters forever. That forever is the big audacious pledge. And it's the thing that gives me a lot of meaning when I'm doing the work we're doing, when I'm on the lands that we have protected. As mentioned in my bio, I have 3 children, and that concept of forever, however long that might be, it really stays in my heart. So forever, it's a audacious thing to say, but something that we're really proud to say. Our vision is an Oregon coast where people, plants, fish, and wildlife all thrive. That is the big picture that we want to be a part of. But the way we do it is kind of in this niche way amongst the environmental movement. As a land trust, as a traditional land trust, we would be working with willing landowners, partners, agencies to bring private land into the public benefit. So working with private landowners who have amazing forests, watersheds, marshlands, whatever, to bring it into that forever pledge of conservation. And then we become the owner, and then we become the steward. So we're doing that ownership piece, not to be land barons, not to take, but really to give, so that we can like set it free again, let those lands be free of all of the interventions, and really thrive. And so a land trust, or land conservancy, land trusts, that is traditionally where land trusts work. There's a lot of land trusts in the nation, close to 2,000. There are about 30 land trust type organizations just in Oregon. And what we all have in common is that theme of owning land so that we can be the forever steward of it. But not too many who get to be next to the ocean and start thinking about the marine environment. So that has been just this really exciting shift that we get to make, particularly with the implementation of marine reserves in Oregon. So Angela is going to talk a lot more about that. But once we adopted this marine program, we worked with the Friends of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve for a number of years. And it felt really natural, because what I'm going to talk about is connectivity and ecological systems. And when you're right here on the edge, like, of course, all of that is connected. You can't own it. That's probably really good. That you can't own it, but you can reserve it. And that's what's really similar. So on land, we call our ownerships habitat reserves. That's what we're doing. We're like reserving it for nature, for wildlife, for habitat. And that is what the marine reserve is too. We have not changed our name. We have to add water and ocean and marine into things as we figure out the evolution of the program. But now we got to not only do that work on land, but also support the protection and stewardship and science of specifically the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, and also work within the Marine Reserve networks and groups like ATRAP and others that are in the protected group. That is the background on who we are and who we are becoming. This is just like one way to look at success or impact over time. It's sort of a boring but dramatic way to look at it. In terms of acres, numbers, years, you can see the relativity from the beginning when we started in 1986 with 0 protected lands to now off the chart in 2024. We have directly purchased, acquired, and received from donations 9,500 acres of land. That's 68 separate habitat reserves up and down our service area from the Columbia River down to Siletz Bay. It ranges in size from 1/2 acre to 3,500 acres. So size is not what we're looking at. It's what is it, where is it? What is the piece that's the heart of the system there? And then over and above that, we also work with communities like the city of Cannon Beach to do projects like the Ecola Creek Forest Reserve, where we help with the funding, we help with the due diligence, working with the landowner, doing all the behind the scenes things it takes to buy land. But then the city is who owns it. So that's not one of our habitat reserves, but it is part of our impact. So over and above that, we have facilitated 3,000 acres. And so we're up over 13,000 acres, which, if you know how much that is, it's a lot. And now we have the Marine Reserve too. So for some people, that can be a really meaningful way to look at it. I find the next slide the more meaningful way to look at the impact. Because really this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. It's not about acres, parcels, dollars, fundraising and that kind of thing. It's about this type of impact because we value the interconnectivity of all life. And from the salmon in the oceans to the salmon in the forest and the marble eelets in the forest to the marble eelets in the ocean. The interconnectivity of all life is really what keeps us dedicated to that forever mission. So this is what the real impact is, whether that's a half acre or 3,500 acres. That should always be there. This is the Arch Cape Falls. Go back. Sorry. And then forests, you know, and so one of the green giants, like the rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, we're in the Sitka spruce band of the temperate rainforest. The Coast Range itself has the Douglas fir is like the dominant part of the Coast Range. A lot of people think of the Coast Range as a Douglas fir Coast Range. But we are on the edge, and on the edge is the Sitka spruce dominant temperate rainforest. Some of the most rain annually anywhere, as we know, comes into these forests. It's captured by these trees. The rain is stored in the soil, in the roots, in the decaying logs, in the moss that's dripping off of the branches. And all of that is slowly dripping into our soil, going into our streams, coming all the way to the ocean or maybe to our taps. So the forests, you can say forest, but like this is a forest, you know, and here a forest is like everything. It's not a tree farm. It's not trees. It's a forest. So the forest provides, and this particular forest provides this incredible biodiversity and abundance. These are some of the most productive forests in the world, especially right now when we're learning a lot more about climate change and how to mitigate climate change and how to do conservation and change human actions in ways that we can, you know, get towards things like net zero and carbon drawdown, all these things that you start to hear more and more about now. I reflect on that when I started in 2005, like we did not talk about it. We did not talk about climate change at North Coast Land Conservancy. It was this, you know, much too politicized topic and people didn't want to hear about it. And now it's like, well, we got to hear about it, you know. Of course you don't want to hear about it. Who wants to hear about that? You know, that's not something that we are celebrating, but the time is now to do anything about it. And thank goodness there's lots of really great studies that are happening around the world and really great actions that are happening around the world. So there's no reason not to have hope about that these changes are happening. And here with the work that we do and the work that many of you do in the room, it matters at a global level. And acting locally is always a good idea. When you're looking at climate change and climate mitigation, the Sitka spruce band of the temperate rainforest globally is one of the most significant places in terms of the amount of carbon that these trees can pull out of the atmosphere and store for hundreds and hundreds of years in their life tissue. And so when you look at global maps around where can we have big impact in terms of like natural protections, they call them natural climate solutions. So not the built environment, not the electric cars, not on the land itself, it's forests and it's planting trees. And in particular on the maps, it's these forests. So you can feel great about the conservation of these forests right here in our community are truly having a global impact. And then of course there's wildlife. I thought about what wildlife I should put on this slide. And I went with elk. Elk get kind of a bad rap these days, and I feel bad for them. and they're amazing. It's amazing that we have this huge, they're like megafauna. They're this huge animal, just among our daily lives. It's something to be celebrated, despite that it's difficult and sometimes dangerous when you're driving on 101. But that is not the elk's fault. It isn't. We are living amongst them. And I can remember when I first moved out here, some of my first close encounters with elk, and they were well, one of them was out here in the Clatsop Plains. So this picture is taken at Reed Ranch in the Clatsop Plains. If you're going north on the highway, it's up by, there's like the Reed and Herding on the highway there. And this is 100 or so acres of conserved land that's on the west side of the highway. To me, it looks like infinite. I mean, it's this huge, huge corridor. It's a really important corridor for all kinds of wildlife, from a endangered silver spot butterfly to elk, coyotes, and everything else. But I was doing these plant surveys out, and I had this close encounter with an elk. And you know, when you're driving past them, I mean, you can take them for granted, but if you're just out there next to an elk, that's when you can really appreciate that these are amazing, amazing creatures. And I didn't know it was there. I was looking down, looking for plants, and then there's just this there's this huge elk so close to me, just staring at me. And I was like, it wasn't a bull, it was a cow. And so, and I'm supposed to walk in these circles to do this plant survey. So I was like, I have to like dig on this transect. So I'm walking in these circles, and this elk just every once in a while does this. And I was like, I know. I mean, I just was feeling it. I was in the elk's habitat. And I felt really lucky to have that experience with that elk. Turns out, of course, it's the mother elk, and I'm doing it during wildflower season, which is also calving season. So she's protecting her baby. You know, I'm freaking her out there, and she is going to make sure that I don't come any closer, because somewhere, you know, behind her, bedded down, is her innocent calf. So elk, I think they should be celebrated as amazing wildlife. I had another experience of taking elk for granted when a group came out to Circle Creek. Maybe many of you might be familiar with Circle Creek, just to the north here by the junction. And that's another one of our conserved properties. And we saw the elk in the distance, and I'm just like taking this group on a tour. Everybody stops, and they were from out of town. A good amount of them were from the East Coast. And it just was such a good reminder again of like that they're magnificent and special. And I'm so glad that there's enough space for elk to continue to exist. And I hope we all will have patience and continue to have some patience with elk as we're driving through. But this place, the Clatsop Plains, like I said, we've seen like bobcat out there. There's probably mountain lion out there. I haven't seen them. You know, just up in the mountains here behind town, there's going to be black bear. There's definitely cougar, coyotes. We have some wildlife cams that are up in the rainforest reserve. And from one camera, just over like a week's time, it was like name any sort of mammal, wildlife, every single one of them came through. It was really incredible, just like living their wild life. So that's another reason that we do the work that we do. And here they are, mountains precipitating into the ocean. That just can't happen in very many places. Mountains precipitating into the ocean. Certainly not rainforests precipitating into the Pacific Ocean. There's only a few places in the world where that can happen. It does create one of the most rich, biodiverse, productive, like intersections of life on the planet, you know, more so than the Great Barrier Reef, even tropical rainforests. Like this is a place that should not be taken for granted. And of course we don't. There's Haystack Rock, and we love to celebrate Haystack Rock. This is the coolest state park where the picture has been taken. And then this whole ridgeline here, Eileen Peak, all the way down to this Angora Peak complex, all of this is the rainforest reserve. And that's the 3,500 acres that a couple years ago, North Coast Land Conservancy, with the help of maybe every single person in this room and about 1,000 others, was able to protect forever through our purchase. These mountains were formed 15 million years ago under the ocean. That's also just super cool. They're different mountains than the rest of the Coast Range mountains around them. It was lava flows coming from what is now the Yellowstone hotspot. It was the hotspot in Idaho at the time. And lava spewed for about 500,000 years, up to 1,000 feet into the air, and it flooded the Pacific Northwest, one of the largest flood lava events known in the globe, created the geology of much of the Pacific Northwest. And some of those lava events were large enough that they could follow massive waterways like the historic Columbia River Channel and make it all the way to the ocean. And so that is what those mountains are. It was the lava-filled Columbia River Channel that went to the ocean and then dug a channel under the ocean also, because the power of a river can do that, dig a channel in the submarine environment. And so lava filled, rapidly chilled, exploded, and then glued back together, all in this submarine canyon. And then over millions of years, inverted and uplifted out of the ocean to create this very strong, tall mountain range that slashes through the rest of the Coast Range. So because of that, you can even find marine fossils up in these mountains, 2,000 feet in the air, that were gathered, in the submarine sediments at the time. And when you're up there, walking on the rocky walls, looking at lichens and wildflowers, and you're walking like this, because everything's rare and endangered. And then you're looking at the ocean, and you were potentially thinking about adopting a marine program at the time you were doing this. And so then we really start tripping out. We're like, it's just like the titles. When you're up there, you can walk on these rocky balls, and it just feels like you're in the titles. It's these rare, unique plants, creatures in crevices and protected areas. It's a very exposed environment with wind and sun coming through. And so seeing the connectivity and imagining that so far, that is what forever has looked like for this place. And what will the rest look like? At least it'll have a chance to know. And so, of course, just water. We got to focus on water. All the many ways in which we live in this land of water, and what water does for us. I mean, water is life force, but in so many different ways. Like here, it's nice and calm and serene. And this is Neowana Creek in Seaside. You all have seen this. I'm sure of it. If you drive over Avenue S Bridge, you're probably looking forward because you're driving that way and hanging a left. But if you were to look to your right, that's what this is. It's an expansive, conserved area. Salmon will come up through these tidal channels to reach up into the small tributaries that come off of the backside of Seaside to spawn. They'll go up into those forests. The little juveniles rear down in this tidal area. And tidal marshes like this, the wetlands that experience the tide, turns out are also incredibly important areas for carbon storage. Land mass wise, there's not nearly as much acreage compared to forests. And so the potential at that level is not the same. But if you look at it at a per acre level, it is more critical and more important and more irreplaceable. The tidal marshes and the wetland soils and the storage of carbon. So continuing to protect wetlands and estuarine areas for all of the critical ecological parts, and also more and more as we know about how important it is for climate changes. And then here, this is Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. And these are those mountains precipitating into the ocean. So going from about 3,000 feet in elevation as the crow flies, like maybe a mile away, all the way down to the ocean and then into the ocean. So the reef, the rocky reefs that's providing the dynamic tide pool habitats around Haystack Rock and around Cape Falcon, it's the same lava, it's that same mountain range geological phenomena that happened, that built this part of the Coast Range. And so it's all connected. It's just easy for us on land, maybe not this group gets it, but it's easy for a whole lot of people on land to just focus on the terrestrial environment. And that has been the case for me also, even as a conservationist, as a biologist, as a somebody who loves the environment. I don't go in the ocean really. I have lived next to the ocean happily for most of my life, and I love being on the edge, on this like dynamic edge. But because a lot of people don't go in the ocean, it has been neglected. We have hurt the land also, but we have a lot more awareness about that. And there's a lot more action in terms of fixing what we have heard or trying to learn how to do things differently. The ocean still is just like getting the short end of that stick, and it's such a critically important thing right now, again, with our understanding about all of the effects on climate change also. So I have found it particularly valuable for myself even to think about this literal connectivity. And for you all that might spend a lot of time in the tide pools, you probably experience that more. It's like you are there on land and then it's sea. You're somewhere looking at the kelp laying on the sand, and then you look up and it's like, how, like 8 hours, is there really going to be this much ocean here? You know, just like, how is that possible? So understanding and celebrating and protecting that dynamic edge, it's one of the most resilient environments, and we're going to need to have these resilient environments to make it through all the changes that are coming in the near future and in the forever. And so that edge, this dynamic edge of the coast, these are the places to put a whole lot of attention because they live in a land of change and therefore have evolved to be incredibly resilient and diverse. And that's what I just talked about. Land-sea connectivity. This is the bridge I was talking about. That's at about 3,000 feet, just up, you see the view, like if you're looking out over the lagoons of the Rainforest Reserve. And that's what I'm thinking about, but the type. So many species, including ourselves, rely on the ocean and the land and the connectivity of it. And the health of either relies on each other. So whether we get in the ocean or prefer the ocean to the land or vice versa, they're inextricably good. Oh, I wanted to give just a little picture of some of where North Coast Land Conservancy's habitat reserves are, and then also sort of map this concept of connectivity in terms of corridors. I say connectivity. Wildlife corridors or open space corridors is maybe a more familiar way to talk about that. So this is our northern service area. We continue to go down off the map. But I brought it from the Warrenton area down to the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. And all of the orange are North Coast Land Conservancy habitat reserves. The lighter orange are the ones that we have helped to facilitate. So done a lot of work on them, but somebody else is the owner. So right here's your Ecologic Forest Reserve. Tillamook Head and the state parks and the public lands are also highlighted. Saddle Mountain State Park. A lot of private land in Clatsop County. The majority of the rest of that is private land. But you can see how right on the edge, we're making some progress around connectivity and corridors. And with the rainforest reserve precipitating into the ocean and the Cape Falcon presence there. With the Polar Creek Forest, Haystack Rock, I can tell it's right there's a logo. We can start to imagine that you could guarantee these connections also. So a little bit closer up, just to be able to see and kind of experience the scale a little bit more too. So like Cannon Beach, the whole time Cannon Beach was just like, it's right on the edge. So there is vastness that still exists. It is not wild vastness, but it could be. And this kind of work that we're doing does make for these hubs that can reserve the habitat for the species and the creatures to be able to thrive and reproduce and move about on the landscape. So that is the type of work that we might be able to continue to do. I think that's my land conversation. Shall we make sure? Yeah. So it was doing mapping like that, working on the rainforest reserve, experiencing this living out here, and talking about connectivity and corridors that began to lead very obviously to working in the marine environment and partnering with the marine reserves. So been a wonderful experience to start exploring that and to see how we can do more work together and have more effect on the marine environment locally. So having Angela on board for the last year or so as our marine program coordinator has been awesome. Probably many of you have met her in the tide pools before or seen her talk. And we're gonna do the rest with her. Thank you. Oh my goodness, thank you all so much for being here on Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day. It is also Oregon's 165th birthday today. So I consider our presentation our personal Valentine to the place that we love and where we love to live and play and work and admire. I'm Angela Whitlock, the Marine Program Coordinator with North Coast Land Conservancy, and our Marine Program is made possible by the fact that we have Marine Reserve Program managed and monitored by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. This is a really, really exciting time right now for Oregon Marine Reserves. They just celebrated 10 years of existence last year. And Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, the northernmost, is the one that our program is centered on. It just had its 8th birthday at the beginning of this year. It is the northernmost and the youngest of all 5. The next one down is our Cascade Head Marine Reserve. Then there's Otter Mountain Marine Reserve, Cape Perpetua, and then finally the southernmost is Redfish Rocks. These areas are set aside specifically because of their incredible habitat. They are set aside for conservation and scientific research. In these areas, there is no ocean development or take of marine life of any kind. So our program, like I said, is centered on Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. And it is situated between the communities of Arch Cape and Manzanita. And you're probably all really familiar with Oswald West State Park and Short Sand Beach. This area is about 20 square miles of ocean conservation area. And what really is exciting to me about it is that NCLC adopted the marine program at the same time, around the same time that they acquired the Rainforest Reserve. So the Rainforest Reserve sitting adjacent to the Arch Cape Community Forest, that sits adjacent to Oswald West State Park, and that sits adjacent to Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, and that has created 32 square miles of continuous conservation corridor. I love that. Every time I talk about that, I just get absolute chills. I just think that
that is such an amazing accomplishment. The Marine program, the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve program, was started by the Friends Group, Friends of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. And they put together a really beautiful program that NCLC was able to adopt, and we're continuing on. So there's all sorts of different activities. Marine reserves are managed and monitored by ODFW. So they are out there doing all sorts of research. There's comparison areas for the marine reserves for each one. So they're collecting data on changes in the ocean over time. Marine reserves have globally been proven to be very important areas. They increase biodiversity, they increase biomass, and it's just the spillover effect of the marine reserves is just a really wonderful way to help benefit the ocean around. ODFW is doing the research. What our program does is support them from the land. So we get involved in different kinds of things like community science. We do seabird monitoring, sea star monitoring. We engage in stewardship activities, beach cleanup, and trail maintenance. Education, and I'll talk about advocacy in a second. Education and outreach, we engage with local school groups to get kids involved. And we have a Tideful Ambassador program where we have folks out on the beach that are interacting with visitors to learn about what is incredible about the marine reserves, the biodiversity there, and how to be a good steward of the area that we care about so much. Right now, right now is a really, really important time for the marine reserves. There's a legislative short session happening right now. Excuse me, happening right now. And last year, there was a House bill that was put up to help fund and continue on the research with the Marine program, and it didn't pass. And that was quite a blow. Not only was the Marine program not funded, but they ended up losing a really essential staff member. So the House bill got reworked a little bit and is put up again during this short session. And so far, it has crossed the first hurdle and is now going to the Ways and Means Committee. So we're going to be very hopeful that the Marine program will continue to be funded. So right now, we're working on advocacy. Writing letters to our decision makers, telling everybody how much we love and value the marine reserves, and especially with Cape Falcon in our area here, how they're so very important to us. So we've been talking about land sea connectivity. And actually what I'd like to do is a little exercise with everybody. If you could all just close your eyes, or don't if you don't want to, but just take a slow breath in. Imagine the tide coming in, and then a slow breath coming out. And then one more slow breath in. And then exhale. So we were talking earlier about the species that are so connected to the land and the sea, and having a healthy connection. We are one of those species. So the air that you just took into your lungs, the ocean produces about 50 to maybe 70% of the oxygen that we breathe. So there's your land sea connection that you carry with you as your little Valentine close to your heart. And that's true whether we're walking on the beach. That's true whether we're shopping at Trader Joe's in Portland, or whether we're skiing on Mount Hood, or all the way in the middle of the country visiting relatives. Your land sea connection is always this close right there with you. So what I want to do is take you to a little place that's my favorite place in the world. Talking about the land, talking about the sea, but there's this really special little place where the land and the sea actually meet. And if I just were to talk to you about it, without giving you any reference, it would sound like something out of a fantasy book. So it's a place that exists that is ruled by a beautiful celestial queen. There are green giants that live 150 years or more. There are warring colonies of clones in constant battle with each other. There are highly brightly painted creatures that are sightless that engage in cannibalistic mating rituals. There are top predators, ferocious, fearsome predators that descend on their prey at breakneck speeds of 6 inches a minute. And there are star-crossed lovers that defend their territory, stick together for life, and defend their territory for life. And this place is called the Rocky Intertidal. This is an amazing, amazing spot. This is one of my favorite places to be, and I'm not kidding you when I say if heaven does not have tide pools, I'm not gonna go. I will stay behind. I will stay here. I will be the ghost room in the North Coast. I don't care. You'll find me in tide pools for the rest of my life and my afterlife. They're magical, magical places. So the moon, of course, has the influence over the tides. We have 2 highs and 2 lows during the day. So the tide goes out, the tide comes in. What's amazing about these areas is the community of creatures that gather here. There are land mammals and marine mammals and seabirds and terrestrial birds and underwater creatures that all gather in this place and interact with each other. And you're not going to find any other ecosystem on Earth that's exactly like that. When the tide goes out, these creatures need to hold their breath for 5 or 6 hours. When the tide comes back in, then they're living their underwater life. They have temperature extremes, which are pretty incredible. So imagine like this is a hot sunny day and the sun's beating down, and then all of a sudden the water comes back in and it's just thermal shock. But they're so, as delicate as these creatures that live here are, they're really hardy to be able to put up with all these extremes. They're under salt water for hours at a time. If it's raining outside, they're inundated with fresh water. I mean, I wouldn't be able to hold my breath for 6 hours and deal with all those extremes right there. Yeah, pretty amazing, amazing spot. So here's our green giant. These are the giant green anemone, which are one of my favorite creatures. They are cnidarian, so they're related to jellyfish. Jellyfish float in the water with their tentacles hanging down, and they have their stinging cells that capture their prey. Giant green anemones suck down with the suction cup on their bit at the base to boulders, and their tentacles come up, and that's how they wait for prey. They're a little bit opportunistic, so they will actually kind of hang out under big boulders where there's mussels, a whole mussel bed up above, because they're kind of hoping that a mussel's going to drop down onto the rock and feed them. So they capture their prey, and that is their mouth right there. So they'll take everything into their mouth and digest, and then what isn't used comes back out the same place. It's a very simple digestive system. Here's a close-up of their tentacles. They feel, if you were to touch them, they feel a little bit sticky because they're trying to sting you, trying to test you out, see if you're something that they're going to want to take in. But they can get about the size of a dinner plate. And like I said, lived for about 150 years or so. And here is our colony of clones. These are aggregating anemone. They are a much smaller species of anemone. Here's what they look like when the tide is out, and they holding their tentacles in and holding a little bit of water in. It's like their scuba systems. So we put on tanks of air to go out into the ocean. They actually hold water in so that they can breathe until the tide comes back in. This is what they look like. A lot of them look like this with the beautiful pink tentacles when they're underwater. And they form these colonies, so they can sexually reproduce, but more often they reproduce by splitting. So this is here is actually a photo of You can see it splitting right there, so that it takes about 3 days or so, but they'll just start multiplying and they create these colonies of exact duplicates. So you can see on this boulder here, there's a line, that bare line in the rock there. This is one colony of a clone, and this is another colony of a clone. And everybody wants their piece of real estate on the rock, right? So the ones on the edge start fighting each other. And they'll pull out these extra special, not these tentacles, but they have extra special tentacles on the edge that they'll try to kill each other off. It's a constant battle with those guys. They're pretty cool creatures. And here is our brightly painted sightless creature that engages in cannibalistic mating rituals. This one here is a thick-horned nudibranch. Nudibranchs are sea slugs. Nudibranch means naked gills, so they don't actually have any protective covering like a snail. How they protect themselves is by bright colors that tells possible predators, I'm poisonous, you do not want to try me. This particular nudibranch enjoys eating the tentacles of the anemone. And rather than being bothered by the tentacles, by the stinging cells, they actually pull it into their system, concentrate the sting, and then if anything tries to eat them, they'll give a powerful sting. Repels all sorts of things we're trying to. They are neither male or female, but they're both male and female. And so they don't require an opposite sex partner. They just require a partner to reproduce. And they'll get together and exchange information. And then the one better crawl away from the other really fast because the bigger one will eat the other one that they just made it with. Pretty amazing. So those of you who are tide pool enthusiasts like myself, we refer to these as nudes. And so if I ever tell my tide pool friends, send me your nudie pics, I'm talking about slopes. Here's our fierce predator, the ochre sea star. The ochre star is known as a keystone species. And actually the term keystone species was coined to describe the ochre stars. This was the original keystone species. They are in charge of keeping the tide pools in balance. They eat mussels, they eat gooseneck barnacles, they'll eat dead things, they'll scavenge dead things that come along. But their job is to keep the boulders clear so that many other species can enjoy living in the tide pool environment as well. They move, like I said, about 6 inches a minute. They'll find their prey. They don't go for small mussels because cracking those open, the effort that it takes would be like having a pistachio for dinner. That's not quite enough. They won't go for really large mussels because they'll probably never get those ones open. They have a very specific size that they'll go for. And then they use their 2 feet on the bottom of their bodies to pry open the mussel shell. And then their stomach is located on the center of their body. They will expel their stomach out of their mouth and then put it into the shell and consume the meal and then pull their stomach back in. Can you imagine? It takes about 2 days for them to consume a meal. It takes me about 2 seconds to eat my dinner, so I can't really imagine spending 2 days doing that. They're a pretty incredible creature. They come in different varying ochre shades, oranges and burnt rusty colors and purples and sometimes really vivid purples. And there's no real explanation for the difference in color other than genetic differences. Some people have blue eyes, some people have brown eyes, some people have green eyes. That's probably what the color differences are in these creatures. They do have, here's a close-up of one of their backs. There's a little spot right there called a madreporite, which is where they don't have a vascular system like we do. They use seawater to pump through their body, and that actually helps their 2 feet to move. It's like a hydraulic system. So when the tide is out, you're going to kind of see them frozen. And then when the tide comes back in, they'll start moving around again. Yeah, pretty incredible little creature there. So the madrepore is where the seawater comes in and it's like a little filter, like a little sieve. And so it'll filter out impurities and will allow the pure seawater to come in and help their bodies work. Here down at the bottom is, there's my fingers, those are the tips of my fingers. You see that little star there? That they can be so tiny. I like to show that because it's one reason that I like to tell people be really careful where you step in the tide pool environment. There's creatures large and small, so all of them matter. And here are our star-crossed lovers, the black oyster catchers. These are my personal favorite bird. Don't tell the other birds because I don't want their feelings hurt. These are my, I can't say enough about them. They mate for life. They are very territorial. They're very protective of the tide pool environment. They're very protective of their grounds. That's probably why I feel an affinity towards them. It's like I like protecting the tide pool areas as well. Black oyster catchers, this particular species is only found on the West Coast from Alaska down to Baja, California. And in that stretch, there's only a total of 10 to 11,000. And the state of Oregon, we believe we have maybe 600 of them. They have a very hard time reproducing. They nest on rocky outcroppings. This particular pair, I took this photo out at Haystack Rock. They nest really low, just right above the water line. So you can imagine they have all sorts of natural predators that want to come and eat the eggs or eat the chicks. But there's also human disturbance, people climbing in areas that they don't know they shouldn't be climbing in, dogs off a leash, drones. So they have a lot to contend with, and it's really hard for them to actually have a successful hatch. But here is how territorial they actually are. Here's a black oyster catcher there. I like it with its little pink legs flailing out behind it. It was protecting its nest from a peregrine falcon. That is a badass little bird that can do that. I mean, to take on a peregrine falcon of all things, but this parent was protecting, I think at that time it was eggs, but this oyster catcher did not want that falcon anywhere near its eggs. So, and it was successful. The peregrine falcon kind of took off, like, what's going on here? I don't like this. So yeah, they are just such a beautiful, distinct, they have a very distinct call. And this is one of the species that we monitor with our marine program. So we go out and find a nest, and then we monitor what's happening to this nest over the season. Yeah. So many more things I could say about the black oyster catchers, but we've got time to watch out for this evening. Before I actually finish, I want to tell you all why this work is so important to me. I feel very passionate about coastal conservation. What a great thing to be talking about on Valentine's Day. Our program is centered on Cape Falcon Marine Reserve and Short Sand Beach. I spent a lot of time on Short Sand Beach. Short Sand is actually the very first beach that I visited as an infant on my dad's back. So it's synchronicity or whatever it is that brought me here today. Now I'm so grateful to be working with NCLC in the marine program. So thank you. And Katie put in a beautiful, we hope you found this riveting.
Sure.
And thank you very much. Yeah.
All right, and stay involved, get involved. There's lots of ways to check out what's going on if you're not already too busy with HR. Happy Valentine's Day.
questions and curiosity, feel free to grab a mentor.